everyone and welcome back to Marvel Mondays. Today's video is going to be an example of a better late than never review because I'm going to be taking a look at the Marvel Select Immortal Hulk. This figure was actually released a couple of years ago now, but it took me forever to get my hands on him. Thankfully, I did get him as a Christmas gift this year and I have to say, he was definitely worth the wait. But before we get into that, the one thing I did want to highlight early on is that this is of course meant to be the Immortal Hulk, which for those who aren't familiar is a fairly limited run, quite a recent run in the Marvel Comics based on the Hulk sort of returning from the dead. Now the reason I mention this is because that version of the Hulk has a pretty specific look. If we look at some of these images here taken from some of this fantastic artwork from the actual covers of that series, you can see that this Hulk has a very specific appearance, which is unlike any of the previous incarnations that have come before. So why is that important? Well, we'll get into that a little bit later when we looked at the head sculpt, but I don't really feel like there's much about this figure that actually relates to that specific Immortal Hulk. So I'm not quite sure why they decided to call it that, other than I suppose to perhaps cash in on the success of the Immortal Hulk series that was current at the time. I'll come back to that a little bit later, but for now, let's take a look at this packaging. Well, it is a standard oversized Marvel Select packaging, which you either love it or hate it, and I'm a big fan of this. I love this big chunky box, and I love that we have a huge oversized figure within it. In terms of the colouring and collage, well, yes, we've certainly seen this before, but it's a pretty nice, attractive design. You can put this on display, and it looks really, really good. Likewise, if we flip it over and look at the side panel, we can see this artwork here of the Hulk. Now, interestingly, again, this isn't actually taken from the Immortal Hulk, so it's a strange choice. What they've actually done here is replicate the exact same artwork that is on the original, the first Marvel Select Hulk release, or green-skinned Hulk release from many, many years ago. So interesting that they've recycled that. Now, if we flip it over and look at the back of the packaging, we can see this fantastic image, this photo of the figure itself in his action pose. I think this looks really good. I think this looks really presentable. I might have personally preferred to have some comic book artwork that we sometimes see in the Marvel Select range here, but this works really, really well, and it still looks great on display. And wow, when we finally open up the figure and we get a closer look at him, he absolutely impressive. He is very much the Hulk. He is massive, he seems really bulky, really solid, he's a nice solid weight in your hands, and he looks really, really angry. I have to say, I absolutely adore this head sculpt. I think this is fantastic. This definitely captures the essence and spirit of the Incredible Hulk. This sculpt has done such a great job of encapsulating the Hulk's rage. I mean, just look at the bulging veins in his neck there. I think that's a fantastic little detail. I love the sculpting here around the hair, particularly around the eyes, his eyebrows, and of course the teeth and his tongue there. Of course, this is all capitalized on by a fantastic paint apps. This looks absolutely brilliant. There's actually a number of different green washes running through the skin tone, lighter and darker, which works so well. And I just think this is so neatly applied that it looks perfect. I love the colouring around the eyes, how they're a little bit darker, and I just think they've captured this perfectly. So this definitely captures the essence of the character without a doubt. Now, I did stress that I think this is an excellent likeness of the Incredible Hulk, because to me, this is a much more classic version of the character than the Immortal Hulk. Again, if we take a look here at the Immortal Hulk, you can see that he's got a very different kind of face structure. His hair is very different. It doesn't really resemble what we see in this sculpt. But if we take a look at a slightly earlier version, even if we just go as recently as Ed McGuinness's artwork, we can see that this is a much closer resemblance. And of course, that is a very classic Savage Hulk that artist was trying to capture. Now, for me personally, that is no bad thing, because to be honest, what I really want is a fantastic, savage, classic Hulk, and this ticks the box for me. I absolutely love this head sculpt. I really love the classic Hulk, and as much as I like the Immortal Hulk run, I have to say my preference, my go-to in my head is always going to be this version of the Incredible Hulk with this hairstyle. So I think this is absolutely fantastic stuff. Now, it's not just the head sculpt that's brilliant, it's also the body sculpt as well. I just love the proportions of this Hulk. He's big, chunky, broad, and huge, and you can see every single muscle popping out, which is absolutely fantastic. As I said before, the paint apps only help to accentuate this even more. I love the fact that they've got two tones of green going on here, and even, I think, a black wash running through it as well to really draw out all of these details. So I think this looks absolutely fantastic. If we look at the hands as well, those big chunky fists look really super powerful, like they can do some real damage. And if we look at the legs, again, we can see the fantastic bright purple, which I think is great colouring, but also the detail that I love that he's shredded out of the pants. It looks like he's properly popped out of them. I like that they've carefully allowed for the holes around the knees, of course, to support the articulation as well. This works really well, and I think it looks absolutely fantastic. So let's take a look at the articulation. He does have a ball joint in the head, and he has no problem moving his head all the way around, moving it left to right, and even looking up and down. So there's actually a pretty solid range of motion here. He's got big chunky ball joints in his shoulders there that allow his arms to kick all the way up and out. There's a complementary bicep swivel there as well, and if we look closely we can see that there is this very chunky joint that allows the elbow to bend to about 90 degrees. It's certainly not double jointed, but you'll get some good movement out of this. There is a pin swivel at the wrist, so that hand can move all the way around, and of course it will also hinge forwards and backwards as well. Now, there is also a ball joint in the chest, so he can lean from side to side just about, and he can move from side to side with no issues whatsoever. Of course, he can also lean forwards and backwards, but there is another swivel at the waist, but mine is pretty locked in place, and I found it very difficult to actually get him to move here, but there is articulation there. Now, there's ball joints in the hips, so that will allow his legs to kick out to the side. There's also an upper thigh swivel as well. The legs, of course, will move forwards, and they will kick backwards as well. There is a double joint at the knee that will allow the lower leg to kick all the way back there to about 90 degrees. And then there is another pivot at the ankle, so this will allow the foot to hinge forwards and backwards, but also lean from left to right. Now, as you might expect, the Hulk is fairly light on accessories, and he doesn't come with a base, but he does have a couple of extra goodies, including an alternate head and two open hands. So let's start off by taking a look at this alternate head sculpt. This is really very cool and completely unexpected. This is the Cyborg Hulk, which is very cool, a very distinctive, very different kind of look for this character. And again, the detailing just looks tremendous. Even the colouring on the teeth is just really, really well captured. And I think it's really interesting that we got this alternate head. It's a shame we didn't get an alternate arm or chest piece to really capture this look, but still, this is very cool in and of its own right. But clearly, this again harks back to the Ed McGuinness artwork that was part of the Jeff Loeb run on this series. So it kind of makes me wonder whether this is actually a figure that's been in development for a lot longer and has only just been released, and they tried to tie it in with the Immortal Hulk, which, as you can see, doesn't really lend itself to it that well, but this is still really, really cool. And yeah, between this alternate head and these alternate hands, you can mix and match and create some really cool, interesting looks for this figure. And he's always going to look really impressive and really imposing when he is on display. Now, before I wrap up with my final thoughts for this figure, I did want to point out some of the other figures we've had from Marvel Select of the Hulk across the years. We had this original green-skinned Hulk from many years ago. This was a pretty cool figure at the time. I remember being super impressed by his size. Now it looks a little bit dated. Certainly the articulation's been improved, and I think you can see here he's no comparison for this version of the Hulk. This is really top-notch stuff. Likewise, if we look at the Mark Silvestri Hulk, again, you know, it just looks a little bit clumsy, a little bit clunky by comparison. I know this is artist specific, which is quite nice, but again, this Immortal Hulk just takes the biscuit for me. And then finally, if we look at this classic Savage Hulk, I actually quite like this figure, although it's very, very limited when it comes to the articulation, but I have a soft spot for it because I think it's got a lot of detail, and I think it works really quite well in its own right. But again, there is absolutely no comparison to this Immortal Hulk. For me, this has to be the definitive Hulk from Marvel Select, and to be honest, by extension, probably the best Hulk figure I have in my collection. This beats out any Marvel Legends or any other line, to be fair. I think this is absolutely the best one I have. And so, with praise like that, it's probably gonna come as no surprise that I'm gonna give this a very high star rating. In fact, I'm gonna give it the full 5 stars because this figure absolutely has tremendously impressed me. Certainly my anticipation was up. There was a hell of a wait to get my hands on this guy, but he did not disappoint despite that. In fact, he impressed me even more. I love everything about this figure. I think he has a fantastic articulation scheme, somewhat unexpected for Marvel Select. I think they've really upped their game in recent years, and this is a perfect example of that. But of course, he comes with those really cool extra pieces as well, which create a completely different look and different version of this character, which is fantastic. But then we have these great paint apps as well, which really are just so cleverly done. I love those mix of greens, those different shades of green that we see on this figure that really draw out the detail and the essence of the character. And overall, this sculpt is just brilliant. So if you want to get your hands on a classic Hulk, a Savage Hulk figure, then this has to be the one for you. This is an absolute tremendous figure, and I cannot rate it highly enough. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.